Hello, welcome back to a new video. I've got a microphone for this video, which makes me feel very professional, although you're gonna have to excuse the cord that connects it to my camera. I don't have a fancy Bluetooth one, so hopefully it's not gonna be too distracting, but I thought it'd be nice today to have a little bit of a catch up, a sit down chat, because as you may or may not know, I've been living in Berlin for 3 months now with my boyfriend. We moved here pretty soon after we graduated and we're moving out and somewhere else in a few days' time. It has gone so quickly, which I will get into in a bit. But I thought it'd be nice to answer some of your questions that you've been asking during my time here and let you know how I found it all, I guess. So understandably, one of the main questions I was getting is, why are you leaving Berlin in the first place? Because it truly does feel like I only just got here. And the answer to this is within the context of mine and my boyfriend's plans for at least the next few years, if everything goes to plan. So we were super fortunate that we graduated university already self-employed with jobs that we could work from home wherever in the world. And I do want to acknowledge at the start of this video that I am very well aware of my privilege here and the incredibly fortunate situation that we are in. So because we had this kind of freedom with the jobs that we had, we wanted to make the most of it and slow travel, which basically means traveling around but staying in the places for longer than your conventional holiday, I guess. So including Berlin, everywhere that we've got lined up for the next year, whether or not it's actually planned in or not, we are going to be in for 3 months or less, which I've quickly realized with Berlin is an interesting amount of time, because 3 months definitely is long enough to really start building a routine and making friends and feeling settled somewhere. But it kind of feels like as soon as you do feel settled, you're moving on again. And that has very much been how October has felt for me. I feel like in the past month, I've really been going back and forth in my mind because I love the routine that I've built here. But at the same time, I know that there's so many more things that I could see or do in this city, and there's so many things on my bucket list that I do want to see or do. That sort of leads us on to another question, which is, would you consider staying in Berlin for longer? And definitely yes. I would love to extend our time here right now if we could. I love where we're living. As I said, I love the life that we've kind of created here. But at the same time, I am super excited about everywhere else that we've got lined up. But I could definitely see us coming back to Berlin in the future and staying for longer then potentially. Did you learn any German? So this is one of the most common questions I get, because I do think it's a concern of a lot of people when they're moving abroad. And I did actually learn German whilst I was here. I was enrolled in an online language learning school called Lingoda, and I was doing 3 to 4 lessons a week. And in that time, I completed, I think I'm right at the end of A1.1. So that's the most basic level of German. But I found that even having a very basic level was definitely worthwhile here, because it was helpful even just if I was in the supermarket, for example, recognizing words on packages, or if I was on public transport and they were doing announcements. Saying that, I think the reason that it was very easy for me to get by with limited German is because Berlin is such an international city and people's level of English here is incredible. So, for example, if I was trying to order in German and my German didn't quite cover what I was wanting to say, most of the time the person behind the counter who I was ordering to would have really good English, so we could sort of fill in the gaps between us. And there was always the option of reverting to English if my German didn't cover it, which is a very, very lucky position to be in, obviously, as an English speaker. I think it would have been a very different story if I'd moved to somewhere in Germany, like a smaller town where not as much English is spoken and it's less international. Apart from the language, were there any culture shocks you experienced day to day? So this isn't necessarily something I experienced day to day, but we moved here in summer, and I think one thing that kind of surprised me, didn't really shock me, it was just like a pleasant surprise, was how comfortable people are with nudity here. And I'd had a taste of this when I was living in Copenhagen, because I used to go swimming in Copenhagen, and in the changing rooms there, it's very common to just be fully naked. You know, there's not really the same covering yourself up with a towel that I've realised everyone in the UK does. It's just everything is out in the open, and it's very much the same here in Berlin. For example, in summer, you'd go for a walk in the park, and it was very common to just see people sunbathing topless. I also went to a spa quite recently, which was textile free, as I think most spas are actually in Germany. So that meant in the saunas, in the pools, anything like that, you weren't allowed to wear a swimsuit. And I think having these experiences, both in Copenhagen and now in Berlin, has just made me realise how kind of conservative we are in the UK. You know, we really cover ourselves up. And it's sort of like, for what reason? Obviously within reason as well. But yeah, it was a very pleasant surprise here how liberal and free people are with that kind of thing. And from what I've heard, that extends to kind of the clubbing culture here and other parts of the culture. I haven't personally been clubbing, which is another question I was getting asked. But from what I've heard, that's like a similar vibe. Okay, actually, let's talk a little bit about clubbing. Not that I can really say that much because, yeah, as I just said, Sid and I didn't go clubbing. Berlin has quite a unique clubbing scene, and I'm really not one to talk about it as someone that has never been. But from what I've heard from friends, it's very different to the UK. And there was, Sid and I were tempted to go just to see what it was like, because we don't enjoy clubbing, but we were told that maybe we would enjoy Berlin clubbing just because of how different it supposedly is from the UK. But that just didn't really feel like the right reason to go clubbing. I don't know, there was something about it that didn't seem like fully respectful if we were just going to go see what it was like, but we know that we don't enjoy clubbing, because I know as well that they're quite protective of their clubbing scene here. So no, we didn't go is the answer to that. And I think a lot of people are surprised when I say that. They're sort of like, as if you lived in Berlin and you haven't gone clubbing. But it's just not for us. It's not our scene. So I'm leaving content with the fact that I haven't seen that side of the culture. What do you enjoy the most in Berlin, and what did you find difficult / not in your interests? I think actually this sort of links to what I was just saying. And even though some things like clubbing aren't in my personal interest and it's not something I've personally done, one thing I do love about Berlin is how many different experiences you can have living in the same city, and how many different lives you could live here if you wanted to, because you do have those people that spend the whole weekend in a club, which is crazy to me, but like amazing for you, I guess, if you like clubbing. And at the same time, There's a massive vegan scene here. There's a massive sort of wellness community. There's so many yoga studios, which is something that I've really enjoyed about the city, the kind of wellness scene, I guess. It's obviously a very creative place as well. And I think to me, it's just differed in that sense from other places. For example, not that I've lived in London, but I have been a lot for work and other reasons. London feels like a very corporate focused city. It feels like everyone sort of, or at least my age, moves to London with the same intention, which is to build their career and, start climbing the corporate ladder. And it's a very fast-paced way of life. You've got this big hustle culture, and it kind of feels like everyone's working towards one goal in London, which I know is a massive overgeneralization. Obviously, everyone's not. But that often feels like the vibe of the place. Whereas I think in Berlin, maybe it's just because I haven't lived here for long enough, which is obviously a big caveat to this whole video. These aren't evidence-based like facts about Berlin. They are just my observations after having been here for a little amount of time. But yeah, I'm going off tangent here. What was I saying? One thing I love about Berlin is the fact that you can live, all of these different lives. You could be a creative, you could be a corporate girly, you could be basically anything here. You could be a DJ. If you want to be a DJ, here's the place to be a DJ. So that's something I've really enjoyed. And I think as someone that's recently graduated and doesn't necessarily know what they want to do long term, I think being in a place surrounded by all of those diverse experiences has been so reassuring. What's been the biggest challenge you've had to face these last few months? The biggest challenge isn't necessarily related to Berlin, but the last few months since I've graduated have been incredibly challenging. And as fortunate as I know I am, and as privileged as I know I am, they've also been challenging, especially mentally for me. I experienced a complete shift in my routine, my habits, my lifestyle when I graduated. And I think in some ways, moving abroad on top of that and moving away from any sort of home comforts that I had with my family, with my friends, sort of exacerbated those uncertainties and maybe just amplified some of those feelings of not knowing what I'm doing, because you're also trying to work out what you're doing in a completely new place on top of that. And that presents its own certain challenges, finding your routine and a way of life that works for you in a place where is not home to you. But at the same time, I am immensely grateful to have had the opportunity to move somewhere new after graduation and a new city abroad at that, because I think it's really given me a perspective that I don't think I would have otherwise had if I'd stayed in Leeds or Nottingham, or maybe even if I'd have done the classic transition down to London. I think if I'd done that, I would have been a lot more swayed by what my friends were doing or what I thought I should be doing, because I think one thing that I've really struggled with post-graduation is feeling like I don't have a plan. And because I'm a very organized person, I'd say, and I thrive having a routine and I thrive having goals and knowing what I'm working towards. And post-graduation has essentially been none of that. But I think moving abroad afterwards made me push the boundaries of what I was comfortable with more than if I had stayed only in what I was comfortable in, if that makes any sense. Like, I think it's teaching me a lot about living in uncertainty and using that uncertainty to my advantage, if that makes sense. Another popular question was, how did you find making friends? So we have made some friends in Berlin, which has been so nice. We've especially made quite good friends with two other couples here. And the way that we met them is one of the girls actually reached out to me on Instagram because she's also a Uni of Leeds grad. She graduated a few years ago. And yeah, she moved to Berlin with her boyfriend on exactly the same day as Sid and I did. So we met up a few weeks later and we went to watch the Women's World Cup final, actually. And she also invited another couple that she had met at some expat networking event, I think. So that is how we met both of those couples. And I know, once again, that is a very lucky way to meet people because she reached out to me. I didn't particularly have to put any effort into that situation. So I think, and I know that's not very helpful to people. So I think if I didn't have my social media platform, and I wasn't expecting to make friends from my social media platform either, it just happened that way and we were very lucky. But I think if I didn't have that, I would definitely utilize the same sort of expat groups as they were using. So I can't remember the exact name of the one that they met through, but they've told me about another one that they're both part of, and it's the Girl Gone International Facebook group. And this is like a huge sort of, I don't know what you'd call it, like community. And they have sub Facebook groups for cities all across the world. So they've got a Berlin one, which is massive. And they've got ones for cities all over the world elsewhere. And I think if I hadn't made the friends in the way that I did, I would have definitely utilized those groups more. Saying that, one of the couples is British and the other couple is American. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about making friends with local people and why I haven't really made German friends here, because I think it's a really interesting kind of topic. And I was talking about this with one of the girls that I'd met because she was saying that she was also talking to another friend she has about why she hasn't made any German friends, and she couldn't really understand why, you know, she's met German people, but they haven't necessarily stuck as friends. And her friend basically said to her, the reason that they haven't stuck is because in order to make any sort of friendship in life, regardless of where you're living, you've obviously got to have things in common with those people. And a big part of that is having a lifestyle that is similar. So when you're moving as an expat to a new country, not that I am an expat, but if you were moving somewhere more long-term like they are, you're more likely to meet people that are also in a similar situation to you, that have moved to this country as well, but aren't native to that country. And, you know, therefore you've got that in common. It's like when you're at university, you're obviously only really likely to make friends with other university students. You're not really going to make friends with like the family of 5 next door because you're living such completely different lives. And I know that that's not a great comparison actually, but obviously you could try and make friends with German people your age here. It's likely that they've already got their own established friendship groups and their established way of life that's likely to be quite different to your way of life. So I think I could definitely see myself making German friends and definitely putting more of an effort into making German friends, because I'm not going to lie, it wasn't something I particularly prioritized while I was here. I think because I knew I was leaving after 3 months, it does put you in a slightly different mindset when it comes to making friends. I think in order to make those German friends, you would really have to immerse yourself in their way of life. So for example, my parents actually met in Germany on their study abroad years, and my dad always says the way that he made German friends is he joined the local football team, for example, and he immersed himself in those sorts of groups of people. And it's also worth bearing in mind that they met in a very small town in the south of Germany where no one spoke English and there wasn't really any internationals there at all. And that's a very different situation to Berlin, because Berlin is such an international city. And even just by probability here, you know, you're likely to meet people from all over the world that aren't necessarily German. Is it expensive compared to other places you've lived? So I think it actually kind of surprised me because Copenhagen is obviously such an expensive city. I think it might be the most expensive city in the EU. It definitely was when I lived there. So I think I was kind of expecting Berlin to be like Copenhagen, but it's not. If anything, I'd say it's more similar to where the UK is at the moment. I don't think, personally, this could be a really bad observation, but just personally, I don't think it's that different to the UK at the moment. Food shops, I'd say really, you know, they're no more than it is in the UK. If anything, it actually might be cheaper doing a food shop here at the moment than it is in the UK. I'd say eating out is quite a similar price. I can't really speak on rent because we did a short-term rental, which is something I will come on to in a bit. And that's a whole different price point to long-term rentals. But I do know that I'm paying less rent than the majority of my friends that live in London at the moment. So, and this is a more expensive flat because it's a short-term rental. So I don't know if that's necessarily representative of the whole of Berlin and the renting scene here. I know it's very, very competitive and it's very hard to get apartments that are affordable here, but we do pay less than my friends living in London. I don't know if it's just London at the moment that's super expensive. So how did I find somewhere to live? What websites did you use? Was it hard to find? So yeah, as I briefly mentioned, we're living in a short-term rental here. And the websites that I used when looking at short-term rentals were a website called Wunderflats and a website called Housing Anywhere. And the flat that we eventually went with is through Wunderflats. And these are essentially websites a bit like Airbnb, but with the intention that you're staying in these places for, a lot of them had minimum 3 months, ours was minimum 3 months. And they're fully furnished places. So you can move in with essentially just your personal belongings and be able to start living in them. But because of that, they are quite expensive. And you pay a surcharge for the fact that they're fully furnished. And when I say fully furnished, I don't just mean they have a sofa. I mean they have like cutlery, pots, pans, everything that you would need to live in them. So yeah, we found ours on Wunderflats. I'm not going to lie, it was quite hard to get. I don't know if I was just looking too early in the year or if it was the fact that I was coming from the UK. Maybe it was our age, but I kept getting rejected by so many short-term rentals, and often with no rhyme or reason. They didn't give me a reason as to why they were rejecting me. Sometimes it was dates, sometimes it was the tenant that had extended for a longer amount of time. Other times they just didn't say why. So I think I must have applied to about 20 before we actually got the one that we're currently in. And when I was accepted for the one that we're currently in, it moved very, very fast. And I think we signed for it literally the same day as I applied for it. That's how fast it moved. I don't know if that's necessarily always the case, but it was a bit of a surprise. And we didn't view it before we moved in, which is very common for these short-term rental websites. However, if it's a legit one, then there normally is something in place that means if it's not what you thought it would be on the website, then you can normally get your money back, or there's some sort of like policy in place. One thing I will say about short-term rental websites is we had to prove a lot of financial evidence, basically. I had to prove that we could cover the costs for the whole 3 months that we were here, plus a deposit that was equivalent to 1 month's rent. And I think I also, because of my age maybe, had to prove that I had like I could cover personal expenses, which was another certain amount. So there was a lot to prove with it to say that we were only here for 3 months. And I think websites like Airbnb do require a lot less proof, but I found for Berlin that Airbnb was way more expensive than other short-term rental websites were. And that brings us on to the final question of this video, which is, where are you moving to next? So we are going to be moving to Montreal in Canada. I don't think anyone has guessed that so far, because it is quite a random place to move to, but we've been to Canada before and loved it, but we haven't been to Montreal or anywhere in that sort of area of Canada. So yeah, we're very excited. We're just going to be going for 1 month, and we've got another short-term rental there that we're going to be living in. And yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be cold. So looking forward to that. And then we're doing a little bit of travel in December, doing like more fast-paced travel. And then we'll be going on to another 3 months somewhere next year, but I will reveal all of that closer to the time. So yeah, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different style. It kind of felt like I was doing a podcast, which is quite fun. And make sure to stick around for Montreal and the rest of our next travels. Also, make sure to follow me on my Instagram and TikTok, because I post a lot more frequently over there with updates day to day. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!